Hi, everyone. Welcome to Us and Flux Conversations from the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University. My name's Bob Beard. I'm a project manager at the center, where we use the tools of speculative fiction to get people thinking about futures that are inclusive, imaginative, and inspiring. And since March of 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago now, we've published short fiction from a stable of talented writers that examine topics around community, collaboration, and collective imagination in response to transformative events like these. Then we host a public conversation like this one to dig deeper into the story and its themes. The latest piece for the Us and Flux series is Tomorrow is Another Daze. It's a story by Ernest Hogan. Ernest is a writer based here in Arizona. He's also the father of Chicanx science fiction, and he's the author of High Aztec, Smoking Mirror Blues, and Cortez on Jupiter. His work has appeared in Amazing Stories, Analog, and many, many other collections. He's currently working on a novel. It's entitled Zex, or Bring Me the Brain of Victor Theramin, and a story collection, Pancho Villa's Flying Circus, and other fictions. Ernest, thanks so much for being here. And we're going to talk about Tomorrow is Another Daze in just a bit. If you haven't read it, it's short. Go ahead and go over to csi.asu.edu/usandflux. You can open it up and follow along. And joining Ernest in today's conversation is Frederick Luis Aldama. Frederick is a University Distinguished Professor, Arts and Humanities, Distinguished Professor of English, University Distinguished Scholar, and Alumni Distinguished Teacher at The Ohio State University. He's the award-winning author, co-author, and editor of 39 books, including a new children's book, The Adventures of Chupacabra Charlie, and Latinx Superheroes in Mainstream Comics, which won the International Latino Book Award and the Eisner Award for Best Scholarly Work. He's the creator of the first documentary on the history of Latinx superheroes in comics, and the co-founder and director of SoulCon, Brown and Black Comics Expo. So thank you both for being here. Thanks everyone who's watching right now. And we're looking forward to a great, fantastic, pretty wide-ranging chat. So as we go along, if you have a question for either of today's guests, please go ahead and just enter it down into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address those as they come in. So let's get started. First of all, Ernest, can you start by telling us a little bit about the story and what inspired it?
Well, I was saying it was mostly came when I found out what you want, what type of the subject matters you were interested in. It mostly came from my reacting to the fact of being, locked up in the house for several months here, and even going back to work under weird circumstances, working at a library, wearing a mask, and we don't allow people into the library, just also the fact that the whole world seems to be undergoing some changes that are more than just the pandemic. I think that there. So I just I basically put a bunch of that stuff together, and it. My favorite subgenre of science fiction has always been what the hell is the world coming to? But kind of looking out at what's going on there, and putting together all these things that are around us, and trying to make something of it. And this has been that was basically what I did. Is I started out with scrap a whole bunch of ideas like that, put them together, put together some notes, and and basically I had my neighborhood, what was going on here. I also had the idea that sometimes the future seems to arrive as a package on your front door that's all been made for you by a corporation, and I was pretty sure that sometimes we don't quite want with the way they did that to us. So I was and I'm always I'm also concerned with the fact that our culture becomes more and more corporate as we get into the 21st century and technology and all that. I really would like to see things coming from other places, besides boardrooms and all that. I'd like to see things coming from people's neighborhoods and just that. So basically, I created a character that the guy is not quite based on me. His wife is not quite based on my wife. Because I think characters kind of need to take on a life of their own and all that, And also, it wouldn't have been interesting if I just did a story about me. You know, I thought that it would just turn into me talking about myself, and that actually is for fiction purposes isn't that interesting. I'm too cautious a person. I tend to see that fictional characters tend to be people who have the knack for getting into interesting kinds of trouble, and most of us writers really aren't that person. We tend to stay out of trouble so we can write about it. And so I basically created these things. That also the idea of a technology that is kind of like nanotechnology that's intelligent and can reform on a molecular level into different. So it's an idea I've been fooling around with for years. Also having to do with the singularity and whether or not it's going to happen, which is one of the themes in Zex, the novel I'm working on. I kind of pulled that idea out and let it grow in a different environment, and came up with something that's a little more focused and more that just has a more specific punch to it. And it's something I've done before. There was a time when for Rudy Rucker's web zine, he asked me to do something for that, and it was a similar thing to this. Like he wanted to say, oh, we should write about what's going on in Arizona. At the time, there was we had a governor who was doing all kinds of things about immigration and all that I loved writing about it, because I realized if I tried to write about that and didn't have a specific market for it, it wouldn't sell. I would be, I would write it and it wouldn't be so. So this allowed me to basically, otherwise I'd have to change names and do all this sort of stuff. So I had a good time doing that. But it's kind of a reflex. But yeah, that's just what I do. My mind manufactures stories. It's sort of the way it works. Since I was a kid, I do that. I take the world and I rearrange it into stories. It's how I amuse myself. It's just why people will find me with some kind of a smirk on my face and laying there, well, what are you laughing at? And oh, it'll be too complicated to explain to you. I'll go down and write it down later and try to make it into something that the public can deal with. But that is just more or less sort of the way that works.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic story, and like all of these pieces with us and Flux, it's short, right? It's a flash fiction story, but there's so much in there to chew on. So yeah, it's really lovely. Frederick, I wanted to ask you, how does this story resonate with sort of our current moment, and specifically with your research and work in Latinx and Chicanx speculative fiction?
Yeah, really great question. And Ernest, it's always a pleasure to be with you in whatever shape or form where you can be together.
And I gotta thank you, because you've been one of the forces driving my career going. The academic world and all that have just been kept me going.
Well, it's mutual. So yeah, what I love about this story and what I love about Ernest's work in general is that, well, he sees us. He sees Latinos, Latinxes. He sees us now. He sees us yesterday. And what I mean by that is his sci-fi, his speculative fiction is set in the future, or it's a revision of a past through the future, where we are front and center. This is important. Why? Because if you turn on your computers, that's how we mostly watch TV these days. If you go to the movies, when we can go to the movies and when we have been able in the past, we don't see ourselves in the future. That is to say, the mainstream's fiction making machine doesn't see us today, because if it did, it would extrapolate and reimagine Latinxes tomorrow, and we are not there. When we are, we're in purple face like Zoe Saldana in Avatar. We might be there for a couple of minutes and then we're kind of blasted away, taken out. We're sort of the nefarious element. We're the part of the urban dystopic scene that needs to be removed and eliminated, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. So when we're basically not there. We are not seen. Ernest sees us, but he also reimagines us. And if you think about this story with Lalo as our protagonist and Rosa, you know, we have working class folk, and they in many ways are responding. Ernest is distilling and reconstructing the kinds of emotions that we are feeling today, very much sort of acting out of fear because of what's going on outside of us, outside of our homes, this retrenchment into our homes. And in many ways, this kind of the fear as the operating dominant emotion in our lives right now. And here's a box, nanotechnology, that comes to the front doors with telescoping legs, beautifully imagined. It's something that we see that arrives on our front door all the time. And now we have to kind of very carefully open our door and bring in and wipe down and so on. But this technology represents something really interesting. Is it a technology that will advance us and take us to a place where we can become more fulfilled as human beings that might lead to greater interaction? Or is this a technology that is invasive, that's listening, like our Alexas, right? And that's tabulating, indexing information in order to drive a capitalist market economy? And Ernest so beautifully and subtly captures that with his story in ways that are just like absolutely amazing, and that put us front and center and put the kinds of people we are and our parents and our tios and tias, regular working people, front and center in his sci-fi.
Yeah. I wanted to chat about that too, because, as you said, Frederick, there's so little sort of representation of Latinx or Chicanx folks in science fiction. And the one that I think of all the time is, Poe Dameron in these latest Star Wars movies. He's probably the most prominent Latinx character. And then he's revealed in the last movie to be a former drug runner, which is just it's so sort of, I don't know. It's just so sort of, relying on these terrible tropes. So Ernest, I wondered if you might speak a little bit to that, like why it's important for you to devote your time and energy to telling these stories that put Latinx and Chicanx people in future spaces. As Frederick says, it's an uphill battle for representation. So I wondered if you might talk about that a little bit.
Well, basically, I do consider myself a Chicano. My mother's maiden name is Garcia. My parents were from East LA. I've got tios and tias and a big Chicano family in LA that I'm part of, and it's so to me getting in touch with the community is talking to my relatives, and also but right now in Phoenix, I live in a predominantly I guess we call it Latinist Chicano neighborhood. We walk out there, we hear people speaking Spanish, and everybody seems to be, most people seem to be brown and all that. And so this is both part of my life. Also, I found early on when I started writing about characters, that were similar to my family and people I knew. It was like I plugged into some real high energy thing that was suddenly the stories went from just being kind of interesting to something, wow, suddenly the people are real, but also I realized, my God, I've got all this material that is literally new to most of the reading public. The Anglo reading public has not heard. I remember getting mad. It might have been like 40 years ago when reading a East Coast magazine and they put the word taco in italics, and I thought that was just so. I saw that as so bizarre that it was like they put in the word, might as well put the word hamburger in italics since it's German, But I guess I just saw it as just a source for writing. It's just been great, and the ideas are there. Also, people, a new Chicano, Latino, Latinx, new identities it's been from like the Pachuco to the Vato Locos I'm not sure whether we have the Latinx is probably the term we would use for today's generation. A new identity seems to be created, every generation, and new identities plural. Because I think it depends on where they're coming from. Whether they're urban or rural, whether they're suburban. That's a suburban. The whole idea of middle class middle class brown people is sort of like a new frontier for most of the culture. And I saw that as a great inspiration for me. And when I did my first novel, Cortez on Jupiter, I basically decided to experiment with basically a Latino, Chicano main character, and creating using Spanglish, which got both enthusiastic and anger from people. So some people liked it. Oh my God, these are the words I've been using all my life, and it's the first time I've seen them in print. And other people are like, oh my God, what are you doing this for? This is not. It's hard to read, and I don't know what these words are, and I can't pronounce them, and all that. So it's been, but basically it's kind of part of me. I can't I can't not think. I think I say when High Aztec was reviewed by the Mexican magazine Umbrales, the editor Federico Schaffer, who was the editor of that, and he said that I understand the Mexican mind, and I wouldn't took that to my father. And I said, look at this guy wrote about me, and he goes, and my dad looked at him. Well, of course you understand the Mexican mind. You have one, and that was just sort of. But basically, so that's. But then again, the problem with that is trying to sell that to the publishers, which basically are dominated by the sort of Latino culture that is kind of very East Coast oriented, and they don't quite get that, and they don't see their readers as being of this. You got to kind of fight hard to convince them that there are all these people they're going to college. They want to read books by people from their background, and they can't find them. That's very strange, but that seems to be our predicament.
If I can add something, Ernest, you are so pioneering in your creative vision and the way you kind of express that through your fiction, that those publishers then were not ready for you because they were looking for the tortilla recipe, or they were looking for the story of how to kind of pull yourself out of the ghetto, and they didn't have the perspective that would allow for someone like you and the extraordinary vision you bring to hit their radar.
Yeah, I've kind of been guilty of being ahead of my time. And in fact, I remember when it was because both Cortez on Jupiter and High Aztec had British editions, and I got to meet one of the editors at a convention once, and she said to me, "Oh, your work is very innovative, and but I think you've gone a little too far into this Aztec religion thing." So that kind of it's been sort of the way the way I've got I've kind of gone too far, and though other people don't think I've gone far enough,
So I'm interested. We've seen Afrofuturism and African futurism, really explode in popularity over the past several years. It's a pretty popular, entertainment genre, but it's also this catalyst for like a political awakening. And so I'm wondering if Latinx and Chicanx futurism, if these have political valences, is this a political or even a radical act to write about these folks?
It seems to be the way people react to it. I do stuff I think is just being interesting, and people will think it's some kind of radical statement. It is just the way things are. We're not sure about that. Once you write about these things, they aren't sure where you're coming from, or whether they can sell it to their audience, and that the audience, which basically with the Afrofuturism, suddenly their skin suddenly became a few shades darker, and their different there. But also what I like about Afrofuturism, it doesn't seem to be as much a movement, with a central core now, but sort of an aesthetic that's allowing other things into a futuristic science fiction artwork. And we're seeing like they're not just doing fiction, but they're doing gallery art, music, fashions. We're seeing that, and I would like to see that happen, because basically, with Latinx, which I keep throwing the word Latinoid out there. I know it hasn't caught on, but with our culture, which I've often thought is La Cultura, we have all that. We have music, we have art, we have stuff going back, and a lot of it gets into the fantastic, because basically that's the nature of our culture. And I think that basically plugging this into the future, because basically the future's here, and so are we, and we're just going to keep going, and that is the main thing there. And I would like to see more of it. And in a way, that's what kind of what we've been doing. I noticed a lot of us, we were writing and all that. We're in academia, we're throwing these things out there, and it is starting to change the world and all that. But we're having to. I guess we're going to have to wait to see whether when our Black Panther comes, and so there's something that gets the attention of the world. And I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but it'll probably happen soon. But you say, well, we'll have to see.
I'm excited to see how we might join arms with our indigenous African American, Asian American, speculative fiction creators, artists.
Oh, God, yeah,
right?
I collaboration. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Nalo Hopkins over there at UC Riverside, as you know, Octavia Butler, our friend John Jennings, who's along with Damien Duffy redoing all of her works in graphic novel form. But what I'm so excited about is, again, kind of, how in your different ways you're choosing to think about either the past, the present, or the future, or all three, in remarkably different ways. Some are choosing to kind of travel into the past African mythologies as a reclamation and a resetting in order for our present and future to look different. And in the same way that you do, right, with Tenochtitlan and Aztec mythologies, et cetera. And so the way these kind of speculative spaces are showing us, are reclaiming, and then kind of showing us different modes of existing, and not just existing as human beings, but as sentient organisms, right? That box that arrives at the front door in your short story, right, is this sentient being. And is it possible, at the end of that story, so beautifully sort of articulated and envisioned, where it becomes this sort of rascuache, where we have this nanotech and the el troque kind of melding and merging into one.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how sometimes a story can simply come by taking a metaphor and making it literal. A lot of times that's what science fiction and fantasy is about. You've got this metaphor, which in a poem would have just been a nice little thing, but what happens when it becomes an actual situation or object? That's always a good thing to do.
I want to remind our viewers to submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will address those as we go. Talking about the story, talking about Tomorrow is Another Daze, it's great because it's very magical. It's bouncy and it's upbeat, but it also has like a suspicion about technology. And so I'm wondering if the two of you can talk a little bit about how science fiction helps us get our heads around, sort of these sort of suspicions about the world.
Ernest, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, there's since basically Latinx cultures in Latin America have been kind of sort of not on the cutting edge of things. A lot of their stories are skeptical of technology. In fact, I think I remember basically when I was starting out, they weren't sure whether I should be writing science fiction, whether I should be doing magic realism instead, because because the technology was all going to just enslave us and put us in take away our jobs and get us just put us down. And a lot of early science fiction from like Mexico and other Latin American countries, they're very fearful, and also even in their movies, it's usually about mad scientists creating monsters and all that. And I kind of always wanted to see it different, because I kind of saw that but also what there's also another tendency in our cultures to take what is given to us and the technology and make it our own. Like the whole idea of lowriders, but also I'm just kind of noticing when you see some guys from the barrio, they go online, their blogs and websites look a little different they're putting up different things that they just don't seem to want to settle for the box that comes to the door the way in its pristine original condition. And that's something I've always seen as a theme in my work. I like the idea that we take it and we make it our own, and that has been the main thing. But I'll say that there's been sort of this turnaround there that we've gone, because I think I've said, like, any magic realism from a significantly advanced culture, technologically advanced culture, becomes indistinguishable from science fiction, because basically, if we wrote a magic realism story about people having a conference on Zoom, it's going to seem science fictional, no matter how the thing, because basically this is very it's kind of hard to go back into a 19th century folkloric situation when we're talking this way, So I've been keeping abreast of that, and I really do enjoy the fact that it used to be I would talk to people from the barrio and all that, and they'd be afraid of computers, but they weren't afraid of TV sets, of color TV and all that. So there's some technology that you can have a good time with. Others that kind of spooky, and they're slowly warming up to like computers, cell phones, all that, and they're making the cell phone and the computer environment into their own. Mm-hmm. And I think that is very an important thing.
Ernest, I think another point, and you kind of brought this up a little bit already, but very often, and we talked about this at the very beginning of our conversation, the mainstream, when we are represented, and this gets to the magical realism point, we're kind of safe to represent when we're kind of exotic and magical, and kind of safely tucked away into the past. Mm-hmm. Like somehow we don't have, I don't know, an Alexa, or that somehow we don't have the capacity for Zoom, etc. Yeah. And what's sort of wonderful about your story is it very naturally just reminds the world that, we're just like other folk, and this stuff is in our lives just like everybody else, and we're skeptical of this stuff just like everybody else. And are we actually losing free will, because in fact it's the algorithms of these massive supercomputer number crunchers that are determining like what kinds of things we're seeing on our Facebook feeds and what kinds of things we should desire. Yeah, we should be very careful and open and skeptical to all of that. But at the same time, it's doing what we're doing right now. Technology is allowing us to have this amazing conversation, to create community in a world today when we are being disallowed precisely because of the pandemic from having community, right?
Yeah, I think. Also, I've always seen things like Facebook and Twitter and even any kind of media. It's sort of something I'm kind of intruding in, because it was kind of rare for them to take me with open arms and put me in the center of things, but they don't mind if I come in sideways, and start throwing stuff. And they go, oh, that guy's got some interesting stuff there and all that. And so I know people that they get mad because they think Twitter and Facebook are doing all these things to them and all that. I kind of think I'm kind of using them. You know, because I see it. I see that. I see my social media activity is basically for promoting my work, and it's, you know, I'm not keeping a personal diary. I'm basically trying to get people interested in what I'm doing, and people, you know, they have their concerns. I have my concerns, and I know those, because it was for a while the website La Bloga that I write for. They weren't letting us link directly to them because of some weird reason. They decided we were spamming or something like that. It was probably because we were probably promoting ourselves too much without buying ads from them. I think that was a big link theory we kind of decided. But we kept at them. We kept like, and then after a few years, they suddenly just stopped that. And now we can link to them directly, because we had to do all kinds of silly stuff where we had to put another site where they could link to, and then they could get to that. Oh God! But I'll also accuse them of racism and all that kind of happened too. But but basically, I do kind of always see myself kind of as an intruder. That's probably just, you know, the way I am, you know, and the way I've been reacted to all my life.
A couple questions coming in. Christian asks, Ernest, to what extent has your proximity to the border, its metaphors, surveillance tech, and competing narratives, perspectives, and histories, how have those influenced your writing and storytelling?
Well, okay, I mostly lived in like Los Angeles, West Covina, which is pretty far from the border, and I mostly live in Metro Phoenix area in Arizona, which also is pretty far from the border. But the weird thing is, you know, there's an old saying that we didn't cross the border crossed us. And it keeps sort of happening. The border keeps chasing me around, you know, or chasing us around. You know, I remember that there are border sites, like even up in like Orange County, you know, they're like checkpoints where you have to go through. And okay, my parents would always worry every time we had to go through it, and they were not, you know, just go through there. They'd look at you and they'd wave you through. But my parents were always like, oh no, they're gonna, you know, we're gonna get shipped back across the border. And my younger sister, though, basically just kind of thinks that's silly and all that. But also, I said, I've also lived in the jurisdiction of Maricopa County, was the jurisdiction of good old Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who basically got defeated in the election the other day. So we're definitely not going to be seeing him again. But he was always running these campaigns like he was protecting the border and all. The border is hundreds of miles away from his Maricopa County, but somehow he can bring it hundreds of miles across the desert, plunk it down here in my backyard, basically, and say he's protecting it. That is just sort of the weirdness, and I say I've written science fiction stories about that. You'll probably be able to read them in my collection when it comes out later on. But it is kind of weird. It's like everywhere we go, we're dragging the border behind us or something. I've been. And it's really not quite something you can get away from. You know, people say, well, why do you always do all this, all the Chicano stuff? Why don't you just write, you know, ordinary stories without that? And it comes out no matter how I try it. You know, how I try not to. So I just don't bother to. You know, this is who I am. This is what I've got to write about. And I said, but basically, the border is it's funny, but it's like it's everywhere I go. You know, it's just kind of a weird, very science fiction thing. I once said that science fiction, the Chicano was a science fiction state of being, and I keep being reminded of that every day. You know,
I'm interested in your writing, and especially this technique. As we talked about, you know, the story is short. It's around 2,000 words, but the characters really sort of pop off the page. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you do that, and then Frederick, like how does this sort of relate to, you know, your work in comics, where you're very limited sort of by text and length and what you can put in each panel. So that's a two-parter for the both of you.
Well, I've always believe that you don't really have a story without characters. You can. There's been times when I've had like a great like science fiction type idea, but I didn't have people to go along with it, and because I came up with the idea for High Aztec. It was just sort of the idea that of a cult that would implant artificial hearts into people, and sort of a thing there. And just that idea alone wasn't enough. It needed something else. And finally, I came up with the idea of religion viruses. Downloading people and changing their belief systems, and the idea of also of the futuristic Mexico and all that. And then it took off. But also basically, I ended up with the characters that basically drove it. And once I can get characters started and get them telling their stories and talking to each other and moving around in their environment, the story just sort of happens. Yeah, and I basically, like Elmore Leonard talked about you can start talking about things, but people are going to scan through your story until they find people. And I think he's right. I think so it's all about people. And basically, Chicanos, Latinx, we are people. We're also very interesting. And I said that like with Tomorrow's Another Day, I did a thing of basically starting out by writing about basically my wife and myself, and then then basically do some tweaking because you don't necessarily have to. When you actually write about a real person one-to-one, it doesn't quite make fiction quite good. You have to change it a little bit. And once you do that, the character takes on a life of its own. And I've always been able to do that. But he said that it gets awkward when you just try an idea that is basically an intellectual thing, an intellectual exercise and all that, because basically you just have a discussion of that thing and a demonstration of it and all that, and it doesn't quite. It's missing something. It doesn't quite come alive. And but also say I'm always looking at people. A game I like to play is to actually take a person that you see on the street or somewhere, and wonder what their story is, and maybe try to dream up a story about this person that you just see on the street. All that, and it always interesting because if you actually look at people, there's all kinds of just by seeing them, there's all kinds of interesting things where are they going, why are they dressed that way, what are they doing, what are they doing there, and say that, but it usually partially comes from observing people, knowing people, observing people. There's a lot of versions of me in my story, mostly because I'm right there. I'm the easiest person to tear a chunk off of and do something with. But sometimes you meet people and they're just kind of interesting. Also, it's kind of interesting when you take an idea and go, okay, here's an idea. What would happen if I put this weird science fiction idea in this person's life? What would happen when those two things start bumping against each other? And it's basically a basic thing on how to create drama and fiction.
So if I might jump in and kind of do like the professor thing.
Okay.
So, what you're asking, Bob, is how does someone like Ernest, but others, we have filmmakers we've just mentioned, Robert Rodriguez, Alex Rivera, who also work in the sci-fi space, comic book creators, Latinx comic book creators, and I can name a whole bunch of them there in LA even that are doing this work, the speculative. What they're doing is they're exercising their counterfactual capacity, which is a fancy way of saying they're imagining in ways that materialize through their fictional form, comic book or short story, but in ways that invite co-creation. So me and you, Bob, and Ernest, as a reader of science fiction, co-creation in different ways. There's the hard sci-fi folk who, in their world building, want to establish the new technologies, the new lingo, all of that stuff, and drop us in, and then put in our characters and the drama and the story. And then there's a more soft sci-fi. And in many ways, this is an example of, say, a soft sci-fi, which is more character-driven, more human interest. And then it kind of brings in the sci-fi, the technology, right, as an ancillary, but that intensifies the moment that we're experiencing between these two human characters. And what is this? It's an invitation to daydream with someone else. It's an invitation for someone like me to read Ernest's story and Ernest not give me everything, but to select in and select out enough detail that invite me in my mind and my imagination to fill in the rest, because we don't like it when we're told, right, what to imagine. And when we're given too much to imagine, we need just enough. And so I think Ernest's short fiction, his flash fiction here, is an excellent example of precisely how that can work so well. And comic books also, you know, they have the extra challenge because they're working with the visual mode, right? So they're showing us already in the drawings. So they really have to be step up and figure out what's selected in and out so that they don't crush that co-daydreaming capacity, right, that we love when we go into these fictional worlds.
Yeah, actually, I think it's, you know, I think that's part of what writers, people really love and so want to go back to, are who trigger that daydreaming process in their head and get them going along with it. You know, I tend, yes, I'm like a compulsive daydream. I'm daydreaming all the time, and it's you know, probably the secret to my success and also the secret to my failure. You know, you know, people go, oh, how can you be creative? And I go, I can't. How do you stop? You know, I really have to have a trouble. It's making it into something that you could make a viable in society and in culture. That's a problem. The raw creativity is just a thing. But yeah, but also basically, if you can trigger in the reader, because also they kind of feel like they're creating it too, which is a big thing. Because there's like the sort of the pulp writers like Edgar Rice Burroughs and all that, who you read when you're younger, and they think, oh wow, and of course it triggers your imagination because it's this incomplete thing and there's all kinds of gaps in there, and your imagination fills it with all this wonderful stuff, and then you read it years later and you find out that a lot of the stuff that you thought was so wonderful isn't there, you know, and you go, oh, well, actually you provided that, and so basically I when people, you know, talk about how, you know, how they love these writers who aren't considered great and all that, we probably shouldn't put them down, because basically there's something in these, even in some of the worst writers that triggers the draining process, and it's a creative process. And I think you know, creativity is a very important thing. I think of it more as a survival tool rather than just an entertainment or something we do for fun. Creativity is what you turn to that day when you get up to do your very routine. You find out the universe has conspired to make your daily routine impossible, and so you suddenly, well, what do? You've got to reach for the imagination. You've got to get out there and come up with a creative solution to the problem. And I think that is, I think, what culture is about. You know, like, not just sort of making you feel good with the entertainment, but basically it gets you in the habit of using that part of the creative part of the mind.
I love that. Thank you both. Well, a question from Javier on this topic of creativity. Javier Hernandez asks, I wanted to ask Ernest about his cartooning background. When did he start and what type of work has he produced? And Javier hopes that you publish a collection of your artwork as well.
Javier, if this is Javier Hernandez, is of course the creator of El Muerto. And I love that he's here.
Actually, I started out wanting to be a cartoonist. I drew a lot of stuff as a kid, and I've done that. I really did not get a chance to actually publish a lot of comics. Though there are a few things that have been published. Like there was a role-playing game called Starfaring, which I illustrated a bunch of cartoons and then tried to do a comic strip based on it, and it later became the basis for the first novel I wrote called Nawada Nawada Nawada, which is yet unpublished, but you know, who knows, maybe someday. But I don't know, it just seemed that also there are two things published here. I do have things in my notebooks that are cartoon stuff that I've kind of talked to my publisher about maybe someday doing a collection of these of the Ernest Hogan's comics. Though I basically got put I had some success as an artist early on, but I basically found that I had more success as a writer, and it basically kept doing that. I mean, I've got things that I'm trying to do right now. It's just, oddly enough, writing is just so much easier than actually creating a cartoon. I admire anybody who devoted themselves to cartooning, because boy, it's a lot of work. Also, a lot of writers I'm finding wanted to be cartoonists originally. You go good. They talk about the biographies of various, particularly about the last couple of generations. They started out like they were at the drawing board wanting to do that. And I still sketch. There's probably some doodles in the there's like stuff I do in my notebooks, and I haven't been doing much lately simply because this has been a crazy busy summer as a writer for me. And but
Ernest, in your biography too, you talk about the importance of those sort of spin racks in comics, and then your abuelos got you that typewriter, and your first kind of publication was a letter in a comic book.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Actually, my first publications were letters and comic books, and it was a mind blower. It was like from me sitting here in my room, with this typewriter, in time when I should have been doing homework, writing these things, and then a few months later, they're on every comic book rack in the country. That was like, oh my God. What else is possible through this, And all through high school, basically, I wrote letters to comic books and got them published. And I would be probably embarrassed to look at them now. I was concerned about a bunch of silly stuff and was kind of a typical teenager, kind of a half-baked person. But the fact that I got into the habit of actually creating words on paper that could be published, and actually that was another thing of this. Somebody said, if you want to be a writer, you write letters to magazines, but think of them as professional writing. Write it, and then proofread it, and then do that. And so it created the habit of being which allows you to be a writer, a blogger, a reporter. You learn that. But basically, it was sort of it was comics that gave me in that way that gave me my start in getting published. In fact, I think technically, I think Julius Schwartz was the editor of the comic books that first published me. So he gets the thing as the very first person to get to put me in print. But it is strange. I've kind of drifted out of it. There's so much happening in comics, I can't keep up with it. People come and ask me about comics, and I'd like to, maybe when I retire, I can start doing comic book versions of things and all that, and it would be fun to actually draw. And now and then my wife gives me assignments. I'll say, you got to draw that.
Ernest, I have a feeling you're going to get an invitation now from Javier to be a guest at their Latino Comics Expo.
Actually, he's been doing it for the last several years. And
okay.
Unfortunately, it's summertime. I'm usually running around. Even this summer, I'm running around busy. I don't know. Everybody, I'd have to somehow find time. I thought, all the conventions are canceled. I'll have plenty of free time this summer, and suddenly all these editors are coming, going, oh, that book we were going to publish your story in, it's finally coming out. Oh, okay. And then
Ernest, I think what you need is that nanotech little box arriving at your front door so that you can do all of the things that you want to do.
Yeah, because it is kind of how do you get up and be a writer, a cartoonist, and and all these other things, all at once. It is a sort of a strange life,
There is a demand. David Staley in the comments says, "Show us more of your notebooks." And so, if there's not time to do it on this call, like you're going to need to get out to a comics expo and show off your notebooks.
I know. Let's say I started using them as illustrations in my blogs, and that got there was now I'm Rios, these two Texas Chicanos who are now teaching in an art school, and God, I'm sorry guys, I'm forgetting your names. Basically started putting some of my artwork in these art exhibitions, and at one of them I actually sold a bunch of them, and only some of these art exhibitions they're not about making money, so but they're actually showing my artwork and things. So yeah, I'll probably. I don't know, maybe in the future we could do something where we do something about my artwork, but
there's the Dallas Latino Con out there.
Yeah,
right?
I said
the Dallas Latino Con.
Right now they're in that dark closet in a whole stack of sketchbooks and artwork and stuff, and it would be hard to get to at the moment, but. Yeah.
So we are running up on our hour, and there's so many questions that folks have. I do want to ask this question. Anna asked one of the first questions. With the key theme of this story of Tomorrow is Another Daze being about invading the invaders and taking technology from the powerful and the dominant and the mainstream and making it your own. Anna asks if you can give a little bit of the history, of indigenous people in the U.S. appropriating technology of the colonizers to fight against colonial domination.
Well, actually, that goes way back. Well, factually, basically, the Spanish brought the horses here first, and literally, the locals took the horses like fish took the water. And though it kind of goes to the fact that some of at least some of them may have the same ancestral roots as the people from Mongolia, because like you look at native cultures from America and native cultures from like Siberia and Mongolia, and it gets hard to tell who's who sometimes. The people look alike, their clothing looks alike, their cultures are kind of similar. And but that they did that. They took to guns and with no trouble. Once again, as I saying, there was nobody saying. There was nobody saying, oh no, we shouldn't be using these guns to fight with the white people. We'll use our bows and arrows because that's part of our tradition. Oh, no, they picked up they grabbed the rifles and in some cases they actually were able to get a hold of more advanced rifles than the settlers. That's kind of interesting that people were willing to sell them stuff that the settlers were there with cheap stuff that they could barely afford, but these people wanted to make money, were willing to sell more advanced rifles to the Indians, but I guess that was I'm not really prepared to go to a detailed historical treatise on this, but basically you do see that the stereotype that of a native less technology advanced people not being able to deal with the new technology is just not true. You see it all the time. They'll suddenly pick up with that. Also another interesting thing is basically electric music, electric guitars, and all that, which kind of advanced more by Black people, and as I said, there's a lot of blues songs about telephones and things like that. New communications, just the radio and all that, which were very interesting there. And see, my dad also used to tell me how back in East LA, back in like the late 40s, when he was a teenager, if you were driving around East LA and there was like rhythm and blues coming out of your radio in your car window, the police would pull you over just on general principles, because that meant you were probably up to no good, and they should probably check you out. And that's kind of an early example of how the technology just isn't always something that the mainstream culture is dominating. It's being turned around and used by other people.
Frederick, anything to add on
yeah,
this?
I mean, we can think about, Ernest's use of language, right? His kind of blurring of all sorts of borders, walls that are normally put up between culture, like high culture, low culture, mainstream Anglo culture, Latinx culture. Like, in this story, we see him kind of intermixing and his kind of rascuache sensibility, making something constantly new. We have like el troque, and we have mierda and pinche and cabrón, and we have English, but a kind of revitalized English. So I would say technologies of language, of storytelling, all of these things, right? I've been like, actively taken and, reshaped and put back out there.
Yeah, actually, I think I have Pablo Cortez, the main character of my first novel, Cortez on Jupiter. At one point, he says he didn't care what language a word came from. If he liked it, he'd take it and make his own and use it. And that's sort of the idea I've always had. I've always just sort of liked strange words and use. Also, I've just when writing about things like a pre-Columbian cultures, it's just even throwing these words around and trying to pronounce them and all that kind of gives you an interesting feeling for this different culture that you wouldn't get otherwise. I see that as a thing, but I say definitely that language is another technology that is always being reused. And I said just the fact that texting is what it's done. I have an unpublished story that basically was which I had. It was written in kind of a thing with the sort of predicted texting, and that way it was kind of based on stuff I saw in other other cultures and all that, and couldn't publish it because the editors all thought it was too strange. It was too wacko, and you're doing all this. You're using you instead of writing IOU and R instead of R. And you're all these things that are kind of considered normal now. If I were to publish the story now, it would be considered. They'd laugh at it how old-fashioned it seemed. But basically, I say back in the 70s, they just weren't ready for that.
So we are running up on the time that we all have together, and I apologize for not being able to answer all the great questions that are coming in the Q&A. I do want to ask the two of you this. Tomorrow is Another Daze is our story for us in Flux, and throughout this series, we've said that this series of stories is about community and collective imagination, and I'd like to hear from both of you. What does Ernest's story have to tell us about community in this moment and beyond?
Well, with my professor cap on Ernest, I can say it's celebratory. It's showing us these two wonderful characters, a kind of slice of life moment, Rosa and Lalo, and they kind of allow in a very controlled way the technology to liberate, to let them go take the adventures instead of just either write or read about them. And so there is that. But then there's Chewy at the end there who's like, hey, when you're back, I want to have a little chat. Yeah. And so, a kind of that, as Bob had mentioned earlier in our conversation, that little reminder that, yeah, we can't just, we have to have our eyes wide open, that it can allow for communion, community, especially we're seeing it being used a lot right now for that. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of the fact that, yeah, it can be also used in ways that destroy, that separate, divide, atomize, and that are, used for profit. But yeah.
Yeah, like I say, and I think basically establishing communities, creating them is kind of what we're trying to do with it with this. That's the story. Basically, I basically base it on my neighborhood with some, you know, basically we do hear mariachis practicing from time to time, and I've got roosters down the road there, and if we not right, probably not right now, but months back, you could walk down and see them selling a place where they were selling Mexican style hot dogs in their driveway, and so you know, we've got this interesting thing, but I think people kind of need to start talking, sharing these things, and I've been sort of and I guess in a way we're kind of doing that with sort of Latinx science fiction, is that we're starting to communicate with each other and creating a new thing, and I've and also say basically Lalo and Rosa, they're kind of representatives of possibilities in that a Chicano couple could be, and but also you know, that they're also kind of like people I've actually known. You know, we tend to get these very creative, brilliant people who, for whatever circumstance, tend to have humble jobs and express their creativity and interest in different ways. And you know, you can probably see that in you know, various neighborhoods across the country, and yeah, I guess in some ways we've got to kind of get the mainstream culture to acknowledge that these people exist, and maybe realize that they have something to contribute to it.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. I want to thank you both for being here. This was a pleasure. This hour flew by. Ernest and Frederick, can you let people know where to find you and follow your work? Ernest, do you want to go first?
Oh yeah. Well, my blog is bondoernesto.com. It you know, you can get there. That's probably the easiest way. I'm on Facebook and Twitter, as I've mentioned before. You can find Twitter. It's Nesto Hogan, because Ernest Hogan was taken. yeah. But if you look up Ernest Hogan, the at Nesto Hogan shows up. I also do a regular column called Chicano Nautica for La Bloga. It's at labloga.blogspot.com. And I almost switched to Spanish halfway through and said .com, but it's every other Thursday. I do a column there in which I talk about you know, like Latinx science fiction, fantasy, pop culture, but also the Chicano Nautica means that I'm exploring the outer fringes of things and all that. So I always have a bunch of interesting stuff that's going on there. Plus reporting on what I'm doing.
I'm really easy. My name, Frederick Luis Aldama. I teach at The Ohio State University, and my Insta and Twitter, etc. handles are all Professor Latinx.
Awesome. You can find us on our website, csi.asu.edu. You can find us on social media at ImaginationASU. You can go to our website, csi.asu.edu/usinflux, where you can read other Us in Flux stories. You can get a replay of today's talk. You can watch previous events, and now you can even get involved in a new project from our center and the Science Fiction Research Association, where we use science fiction to look at how to face today's challenges. So yeah, definitely check all of that out. I do want to mention, you know, as we talked about at the beginning of this, we started this project back in March as a way to use storytelling and conversation to examine a world that back then it seemed just off kilter and temporarily out of whack. And of course, you know, as spring progressed into summer, you know, things have continued to be strange and unpredictable and fraught. And now we're going into another season. And, you know, there's an attempt to return to comfortable traditions and a sense of pre-pandemic normalcy. But I think it's clear that we're still in flux, right? We're grappling with the world that we're presented with and a multitude of possible futures that we might occupy. And, you know, Ernest leaves us with this beautiful image of Lalo and Rosa embracing the weirdness of their situation and literally riding off into the sunset. And I think that's a really great place to leave our series, just to close out this particular chapter of Us in Flux. You know, I hope that this series has helped, whether it's just a temporary escape or as a way to spark your imagination and help you think about ways that we might all move forward as better citizens of a better world. So, you know, with that, on behalf of my co-editor, Joey Esherick, we'd like to thank all of our brilliant collaborators, all of the authors who gave us alternative visions of the future, and the scholars that helped us make these stories come to life. We'd also like to thank all of our colleagues around Arizona State University who supported this work, and especially our team at the Center for Science and the Imagination who made this work possible. Director Ed Finn, Assistant Director Ruth Wiley, design strategist Nina Miller, who created unique and beautiful pieces of art to accompany each story. Business manager Cody Stotts, who works tirelessly behind the scenes. And our colleague Tyler Eglin, who provided the name of this project. So thanks to everyone on the team, and folks that I didn't mention, you are of course appreciated. Most of all, thank you to all of you for reading and watching and being a part of our community. So with that, you know, as always, stay well, stay healthy, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.